This is Dr. Wysong. This series of videos on the big questions of life will show where each one of us is led if we dare to leave behind preconceived ideas and see where reason and evidence lead.
Nuts, bolts, gears, and rotors prove intelligent design. Let's say you were strolling on the beach looking for nice seashells, and you came across a set of perfectly intermeshing gears. Then you looked to the side and there was also a bolt with a nut screwed onto it. And beside that was a rotary mechanism. Would you conclude the waves, wind, sand, or other bits and pieces of matter made these things on their own? Certainly not. You'd conclude the obvious, that some intelligent person or people made them. And you wouldn't be alone. Any person on the planet would conclude the same. Aside from common sense, I can say this because archeologists and anthropologists finding even crudely chipped stones conclude that such artifacts are the product of intelligence. The Oldowan stone tools found in Africa are an example. And as a layman would look at these, they look just like regular stones, but they have some chipped surfaces, which makes archaeologists conclude they were made by people. Now, if that's the obvious conclusion about chip stones, there could be no other conclusion if we found gears, nuts, bolts, and rotors. Well, here are gears wired to a neural circuit, also to muscles and to a brain, optics, and all the other paraphernalia found in living creatures. Billions of components, all interconnected in a machine that is not just thousands, but millions of years old. This tiny plant hopper, insect machine, if you will, which is 1/10 of an inch long, can bullet skyward faster than the eye can see and accelerate in 2 milliseconds to 400 Gs, which is more than 20 times what the human body can withstand without tearing apart. The gears are located in the hip of the issus, this tiny plant hopper, and in 1/300,000th of a second, synchronize the legs for the jump. Unlike kangaroos and us, where neural feedback loops permit coordination of the jump, the issus jump occurs faster than the 6 milliseconds it takes for nerve transmission to and from the brain. Thus the need to lock the legs with gears so the insect doesn't spiral out of control. It's only in the young molts of the issus machine that the hip gears are found. In the adult version, another design in its program takes over whereby the gears are gone and the legs locked together by friction as occurs in other jumping insects. In other words, the issus has not only one evolutionarily impossible jumping mechanism, but it has two. Gears as we know them were not invented until the genius of the Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler in the 18th century. So there must have been genius that invented the issus gears millions of years before. Bacterial rotors. The bacterium E. coli, Escherichia coli, is just one cell, but it contains many machines. A remarkable one that gives it locomotion is the flagellum, a whip-like strand that propels the organism through liquid. To describe this mechanism, terms must be used that are identical to those used by engineers, such as reversible rotor motor, acid driven at 20,000 revolutions per minute, flexible coupling, universal joint, propeller, stator, and bushing. Humans didn't invent such mechanical elements of machines until the 1800s. Their creation was heralded as genius and gave rise to electric motors, helicopters, and other machines propelling the Industrial Revolution. None of these great accomplishments has ever been attributed to anything other than great intelligence. These same elements existed in bacteria 3.5 billion years ago. Nothing less than great intelligence can account for them. Nuts and bolts. If the flagellum of E. coli isn't convincing enough, let me pile on with the nuts and bolts in the Trigonopterus oblongus. It is a weevil. Instead of the ball and socket like we have for our hip-leg joint, the weevil has a bolt screw on the leg that seats into a nut thread in the hip. Technically, the coxa is the thread, and the trochanter is the screw. Most insect joints work like hinges, which are amazing in their own right. This weevil nut and bolt mechanism locks the legs and stabilizes the beetle for certain feeding actions when moved to the extreme of the thread in one direction, and then frees up for walking when unscrewed. Nuts and bolts weren't invented and integrated into machines until about 1500 CE. The weevil machine, according to the evolutionary timetable, is about 100 million years old. Now, if intelligent humans had to invent nuts and bolts, why would intelligence 100 million years ago not have been required to invent the beetle's leg machines? In effect, if on your beach stroll you saw one of these weevils, you would have to conclude it's the product of intelligence, not wind, rain, waves, or other materialistic evolutionary arguments. No evolutionist can provide a cogent step-by-step biochemical progression from no joint to a bolt and nut joint. Nor is there even one observed example of any machine anywhere at any time coming into existence spontaneously. And this is for good reason, since for evolution to happen, several natural laws would have to be broken. But natural laws can't be broken. On the other hand, the proof that the leg had to have been designed by intelligent agency is the fact that no machines have ever been observed. And science is, after all, observation. No machine has been observed to come into being other than by intelligent intervention. Keep in mind as you look at this leg joint or any other part of any living organism, even a hair, that they are comprised of trillions of integrated biochemical machine components constantly moving about at blinding speed. Evolution must explain how each of these components came to be, step by step. An attempt isn't even made. Rather just fanciful stories based upon faith. But that's mythology and religion, not science. Biochemical machines. In the diagram, there shows a snapshot, fraction of the dynamics of what goes on in a minuscule bit of living tissue. There are biochemical gears, nuts, bolts, and rotors within and upon interlocked mechanism after mechanism. It's staggering, the biochemical complexity in even one cell or even a part of a cell. Biochemical knowledge, as reflected in these drawings of chemical pathways, are mere snapshots and don't reflect the dynamics and speed of what actually happens second by second in living tissue. Now the takeaway from all of this is that the issus gears, bacterial rotors, and weevil nuts and bolts present a simplified way of proving living things require intelligence for their origin. But these fantastic parts are just the tip of the iceberg. Every tooth on the gear and part in the nut, bolt, and rotor mechanisms contain millions of chemical components that have to be precisely matched with the partner mechanical parts for the machines to function. Such interplay occurs continuously in an orderly way in every cell, trillions of complex machine-like interactions at lightning speed every second in order for life to occur. But what is the so-called scientific explanation for these biological mechanisms? This is the headline from an article about the issus gears found in Scientific American, and I quote, "Working gears evolved in plant hopping insect," end quote. Popular Mechanics states that the issus, quote, "evolved its acrobatic prowess because it needs to flee dangerous situations. There's been enormous evolutionary pressure to become faster and faster and jump further and further away," end quote. Similar quotes can be found for the E. coli rotor and the weevil nuts and bolts in its leg. No detailed genetic or biochemical mechanisms and pathways for how this evolution over time could occur automatically. No fossils showing the development. No experiments, not even attempt at actual proof. Instead, evolutionists just glibly pronounce that evolution did it because issus bugs, weevils, and E. coli, quote, needed it. But if someone else says intelligence is responsible even when intelligent design is clearly written all over life's gears, rotors, nuts, bolts, and millions of other mechanisms, that's supposedly absurd. It's not. Thank you for listening. Keep in mind that solving the big questions requires foundations upon which truthful answers can be built. So please work through the series sequentially. This information has taken decades of research, thought, and writing. Aside from the peace of mind the solutions have brought me, the only reward I seek is hearing that it's helped you. Feel free to contact me with any comments or questions at asifThinkingMatters.com.